Peter, always great to have you on.
Great to be with you, Glenn. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so Mamdani, this is not a stunning update, except it is kind of stunning because now you have verified it. Tell me what you found on the funding for Mamdani.
Yeah, well, so here's the interesting thing people forget. New York is, of course, an international city, but the world is watching. The Hezbollah publication Al-Khandiq had an article on Mamdani talking about the fact that this guy could win mayor of New York, and if he wins mayor of New York, that could propel him to the national stage, including he could become secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Oh my God. Why a terrorist organization would mention Homeland Security is interesting, but their point is correct, Glenn, that the world is watching. So you have the royal family of Qatar, the Al Thani family, which not only has bankrolled the Mamdanis to the tune of millions of dollars on film projects that his mother has done, they're out on social media around the world pushing for Mamdani's campaign. And Mamdani actually in September, think about this, Glenn, he's running for mayor of New York. He goes on Qatari TV. He goes on TV in Qatar to talk about the fact that the United States is funding genocide in Israel, et cetera. The bottom line is that he and his family are joined to the hip with the Qatari royal family. And what you need to understand about the Qatari royal family is this is the same family that in the 1990s protected Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He was the mastermind behind the 9/11 terrorist attacks. He was involved in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. He fled the United States. He went to Qatar, where the same royal family gave him a no-show job working for the government and protected him. And when Louis Freeh and the FBI came looking for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and said, we want this guy, the Al Thani family, which of course is funding Mamdani, back in the 1990s, they helped him escape the net of the FBI. And Louis Freeh later said in the early 2000s, had they gotten him, they could have prevented 9/11.
Okay, can I push back on this a bit? Sure. You say the Mamdani family is tied to the hip, but isn't the Trump family also tied to the hip?
Well, yeah, I do not like what is going on with the Qataris at all. What I would say, one important distinction, when we're doing things like the air base in Idaho, which I think is a terrible idea, the Mamdanis, unlike the Trumps and unlike the U.S. federal government, completely mimics what the Qatari foreign policy line is, which is anti-Israel, pro-Hamas. They line up completely on the policy positions. In fact, the Mamdani father has said that terrorism is really a Western invention. It has nothing to do with Islam. He wrote a famous book on that in the 2000s. Another thing he said, Glenn, and by the way, his son has not pushed back on this at all, that situations like what happened in Sudan with the massacre at Darfur where 400,000 Christians were slaughtered by Islamists, that's not genocide. That was a civil war. There was damage on both sides. The point is that the Mamdanis have been apologists in exactly the same way that the Qatari royal family has. And that's what I think makes it so concerning. But, I mean, I could talk about Iran. The International Quran News Agency, which is an Iranian news agency, has also run glowing profiles on Mamdani and has said his campaign is Islamic in not only its messaging, but also in its goals and in its ends. You have Imam Wahaj, who you have talked about before. This is an imam who has 3 adult children who are in jail for life for their involvement in the terrorist attacks. Imam Wahaj has funded the super PAC, which funded and is funding Mamdani's gubernatorial campaign. And Imam Wahaj back in 2021 gave an interview where he predicted that there would be a rising figure who would become mayor of New York backed by Islamic voters. So this is a global mayoral race, and people in New York and people around the country better be aware the stakes are higher than just what happens in New York City.
Tell me about the CCP.
So the CCP, it's interesting. They have been running very positive stories on Mamdani. I just posted on Twitter X yesterday a story from the Center for Marxism in China, which is, of course, a government-run entity, saying that the Mamdani campaign is a bright spot in a very dark situation in the United States from their perspective. But then you also have the interesting role of a guy named Roy Singham. I talked about him. In fact, you and I talked about him back in 2024. Yeah, when my book BloodMoney came out. So Roy Singham runs something called the People's Forum in New York. It is very radical left wing. Roy Singham, of course, American billionaire, lives in Beijing now, very close to the CCP, attends CCP events. Singham's People's Forum has been very supportive of Mamdani's campaign. And you also have Roy Singham's niece runs an organization called Jews for Mamdani. Now, she's actually not Jewish. You see what's going on here.
Yeah.
You see what's going on here. But the point is, Glenn, that the CCP shares the same interest that these other foreign actors have in seeing Mamdani win, because they see this as a foothold that they can establish in the United States. And I would say and I have friends who basically have adopted the position, Glenn, let New York fall, let Mamdani get elected. It's going to be terrible. So. People see how bad socialism is. I'm telling you, if Mamdani wins, they're going to work the machineries of government so that they retain office, meaning this radical left, Islamist left-wing movement retain power in New York going forward.
You also exposed that most of the donations that he is getting are from out, like 78% of his money is coming from outside of New York. I mean, the number one state contributing to his campaign is California.
Yes, that's right. And that includes political action committees that are tied to CARE, which, of course, you have reported on over the years. Their ties to Hamas, their involvement in various Islamic causes. And you also have news reports that have just been coming out that so far there are at least $13,000. The number is going to be much higher, but $13,000 that have been identified so far of illegal foreign donations coming into the Mamdani campaign. And the challenge here is, Glenn, we've seen this happen in the past with other candidates. They wait until the last month because the reporting for donations will come out after the election. So that number is going to be much higher. And based on what you see the Al-Thani family doing on social media around the world, boosting his campaign, I expect that number to be massively higher before it's all said and done.
So, Peter, have you talked to Kash Patel or anybody in the FBI about this yet?
So we had one of our vice presidents for research, Seamus Bruner, was at the roundtable last week in the White House with the president, and we showed our Follow the Money report. It was a 3.5-minute presentation. The president very publicly then said to us, would you please share this information with the Attorney General and with the Director of the FBI? And that information exchange is taking place, and there is communication. And Glenn, as always, the information we have is all public record, meaning we dig and we find. This is not speculation. These are not anonymous sources. So, yes, that information is being shared with U.S. law enforcement, something we've done since the founding of GAI going back to 2011.
So I got a call from the FBI over the weekend, and I had 3 FBI agents show up at my house this weekend. And
this was friendly, right?
It was friendly. Yeah, I said that. I said, I would be a little more concerned if it was the last administration, but you guys are friendly, right? And they say, yes, Mr. Beck. We just have some questions about a special I did, where we just tied, open sources, easy open sources, together. And they wanted to know more about it. And I started talking to them. I said, it kind of works like the Tides Foundation. You guys are going to have a hard time finding things because they're very good at money laundering, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, but you're going to have an easier time because you can go into banking records, if you get the warrants, et cetera, et cetera. And I was surprised at how far behind they were. And I talked to Kash Patel yesterday. I was at the White House and he said, Glenn, we can pretty much tell you everybody who went to a Latin mass in the last 5 years, but nobody's done any of this work. No, the administrations of the past since Barack Obama, they have sworn off all investigations of this stuff. So we are starting from the very beginning. Yeah. They really need help. I mean,
well, they do. And Glenn, the special you did was excellent. And you do the same things we do. It's public information. In other words, don't take my word for it. You can replicate what we found, and you can use as a government authority subpoena power. This is the same thing that happened, remember, with the Hunter Biden situation. We learned a lot more once you had congressional committees issuing subpoenas. In this particular case, I would argue the stakes may even be higher, because what you're seeing is the organized funding of radical groups who are not out protesting and carrying signs, and they are engaged in violent, provocative acts. They are targeting U.S. law enforcement. And this is the very definition of RICO, right? The RICO statutes were designed to get organized crime figures. You'd have the street guys who were, beating people up, and those people would get arrested, but they could never get to the money people that were organizing it and paying these guys to beat people up. So RICO came along and said, you know what? We are going to now be able to charge people with organizing criminal violent activity. So this is a classic definition of RICO, and it's a question now of federal law enforcement and prosecutors at DOJ doing exactly what you said, which is pulling financial records. And if you've got entities and individuals, which I believe you do, you've demonstrated it, we've demonstrated it, that are knowingly funding groups that are engaging in violent conduct on American streets, that to me is the very definition of RICO and the reason that it was designed in the first place.
So I agree with you on that, but let me come back. Let me take a 1 minute break. I want to come back with you, Peter Schweizer, and ask you, are you going to be able to track the funding to the street activity? Do you believe that connection is there? Because I think they're winding up a lot of very sick and unhealthy people and street people, et cetera, et cetera. You don't necessarily have to pay, and somebody can come, by with $100. Do you think we're going to find the actual funding of the street movement? Because, everybody in the press is saying, oh, well, there's no organization here. Well, who's paying for the union printed signs and everything else that they have? So, Peter, we're working on a special for either January or February, and I'd love to involve you in this.
Sure.
But do you think we're going to be able to find the actual payoff of the streets, or even the people who are supplying the bricks and everything else that are sometimes dropped off on streets?
I don't think we have to show that. We may be able to show that. I think it is enough based on, precedents and the way this has been applied in the criminal world. If you have an organization, for example, this happened down in Georgia in the so-called Stop Cop City. This was the example that Seamus Bruner used in front of the president, where you had actual organizations that were funded by the Tides Foundation. Those organizations were involved in protests that led to throwing Molotov cocktails, attacking police officers. Those organizations and members were charged by prosecutors in Georgia, Democrats, by the way, the prosecutors were, with domestic terrorism, RICO, a whole bunch of other sorts of conduct. If you can show that an organization, a grant giver, let's say, is giving money to a nonprofit organization that has engaged in this violent activity in the past, there's a pattern there, and there clearly has been with a lot of these organizations. And then that organization is communicating and coordinating with violent protesters. That is all you need to demonstrate. You don't need to actually show that the brick that was thrown or the Molotov cocktail that was thrown, the gasoline in the bottle were paid for by the grantor. You are funding an organization that is coordinating violent conduct that is taking place. That is what I think the legal threshold is. So what they need to do is do what was done by prosecutors during January 6th. Let's get the communication devices of these individuals that are involved with organizing protests. Were they communicating with other protesters who ended up pushing the violence? Then you have organizations like the Party for Socialism and Liberation and the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. We've talked about those before, Glenn, and I know you have as well. These are hardcore Marxist groups. They align themselves with the CCP. You can find so many examples where they are engaged in protests that turn violent. So, you want to look at those organizations. Are the leaders of those organizations communicating with people that end up throwing the Molotov cocktails, et cetera? If you show that, you absolutely have coordination. You don't have to show that the gasoline was paid for by the grant giver.
Wow. Peter, I have real hope for the first time that we are actually going to go after these people and we could get to an end of that. Is this foolish hope, or do you have the same kind of feeling?
No, I share that, Glenn. Look, there are a couple of things that are really, I think, exciting about this. Number one is you have the political courage in Washington, it seems, at least from the president, to pursue these issues. But the second thing that I do appreciate is it's being done in a transparent way, which allows for, accountability.
Yep.
They're not saying, well, we'll get back to you in a year. I mean, there's actually communication. Now we need to see that the action is taking place, but there does absolutely seem to be movement. So I'm very encouraged, as you are.
Peter, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much for the update. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Glenn.
More in just a second.